What is up, night crawlers? Thank you so much for being here tonight. Tonight's video is a prologue from an audiobook that I just completed. So, sit back, relax, and let me tickle those inner fears.
It Lives in the Woods, written by Boris Bacic. Prologue. "Careful where you step," Jaden called out, a hand instinctively raised. Isabella was a little ahead of him, peeking somewhere off the trail. She'd been doing that all day. Whenever she saw something interesting, she rushed ahead, disregarding any dangers along the way, despite Jaden's warnings. He couldn't blame her. This was the third forest they had hiked in Europe, and each was better than the last. "Izzy!" he called out again, breathless. The hike had been an exhausting one. Jaden was no stranger to long hikes on inhospitable terrains, but taking on this trail had proven to be quite a challenge. Isabella was tired too. He could see it in the beads of sweat that coated her forehead, the way her shoulders slouched, and the way her chest heaved up and down. But excitement fueled her, Jaden knew, and that was probably stopping her from noticing the exhaustion, even though they had been walking for hours. "Izzy, wait! Slow down!" Jaden said with a bouncy voice, even though Isabella had already stopped. Only when he got closer was he able to see the glow in Isabella's eyes. Oh no. He knew that look all too well. It was the look that said there was something marvelous ahead, but probably either illegal or dangerous to reach. Sure enough, when Jaden followed Isabella's gaze, he understood what got her attention so hypnotically. Off the beaten path, the trees descended into a rocky, mossy ravine, at the bottom of which rested something that differed from the green and brown hues they had walked past in the last few hours. "Is that a building?" Jaden cocked an eyebrow. "Not just one, look." Isabella pointed down the slope. Jaden just then saw it. Not just one house, but rows of them, lined in a makeshift street, obscured by the foliage of the tall trees. "Wow, what is that?" He looked at Isabella for an answer. She offered an aloof shrug, her eyes still fixed on the wonder in the forest. "I don't know. You said you researched the area extensively online for all the sites, didn't you?" "Yes, but there was no mention of anything like this." "Huh." Jaden turned his head to face the village again, his hands on his hips. His feet were killing him. He was hungry and thirsty, and his shoulders protested over the weight of his backpack. But strangely, a surge of renewed energy swallowed him. He wanted to go down and see the village. "I'm going to go check it out. Want to come with?" Isabella asked. Of course she was going to check it out. Whenever they went on urban explorations, she rushed to get a closer look at whatever they ran into, and only worried about the risks and dangers after. "Sure," Jaden said. For the first time they ran into the abandoned houses. Isabella turned to look at him. Her eyebrows stood high up, her forehead furrowed in surprise. "Wait, really?" She couldn't contain the smile that stretched her lips. "It's not every day that we run into an abandoned village in the middle of the forest." Jaden shrugged. "But I'm going first so I can test the ground." "Okay." Jaden was grateful that he decided to wear his hiking boots and cargo pants, because the wild undergrowth reached all the way up to his waist and poked at him with sharp twigs. The stinging nettles that he plodded across rustled, just waiting for his exposed skin to come in contact with it. The slope leading down was covered in an abundance of moss, but at least the surface was rocky and made for a natural staircase, so Jaden didn't need to worry about sliding uncontrollably to the bottom. At this height, it probably would have been fatal unless one of the trees near the bottom stopped his fall. Even so, it would still be painful. Jaden planted his foot on the first step of the ravine, carefully testing how slippery the moss was. The rustling behind him told him that Isabella was already slogging toward him. After the second step, descending became easier. He had to circumvent the ravine since some of the crags were either too narrow or too low for him to step on them from where he stood. Every couple of steps, he turned around to make sure Isabella was okay. Her gaze was fixated down, intently focused on her footing. She was much shorter than Jaden, so she often had to sit at the edge of the rocky step and drop off to the one below. They approached the ground much faster than Jaden thought they would. The rocky surface ended, replaced by the soft ground covered by long patches of grass. The houses were just in front of them, merely a few dozen feet away. The undergrowth and the saplings densely covered the area, which made walking all the more difficult. Jaden's foot sank between the leaves and into the soft ground with each step he took. Twigs snapped occasionally under his or Isabella's boots, echoing prominently in the area. Something rustled nearby. Jaden knew that it hadn't come from him or Isabella because the sound came from somewhere to the side. Both of them stopped, scanning the nearby area for any activity. After a moment of nothing happening, Jaden resumed trudging forward. What if there's snakes here?" Isabella asked. "Hey, it was your idea to check it out," Jaden retorted. "Oh, come on. Not like you wanted to ignore such a sight." Jaden gave no response to that. He knew there were no snakes in the area, at least not venomous ones. That's what the local had convinced him of when he had asked about it. Isabella was terrified of reptiles, so he had to make sure it was safe for her, since he knew she'd completely forget about the detail until it was too late. Jaden's head instinctively turned in the direction of where the sound earlier had come from, just to make sure nothing was coming at them. A bear mace and a knife rested in his pockets, ready to be used, even though there should be no need for them. The undergrowth ended when they emerged on the cobblestone street. "Finally," Jaden breathed a sigh of relief. Isabella spun in a circle. Wow. Her phone was already out of her pocket, her finger tapping on the button to snap shots all around her. Although most of the houses were made out of concrete, some consisted of wood, and all were destroyed beyond repair. Moss covered whatever was left of the concave rooftops. Vines encroached on the walls and crept in the houses through the empty windows. Weeds and roots poked between the old cobblestones. "What is this place?" Isabella took a picture of a tall structure with the spire on top of the roof. The top of the spire looked like it had been broken off, and Isabella assumed it used to be a church with a cross dwarfing the rest of the village. "Beats me," Jaden said. He looked impressed, and Jaden rarely showed how impressed he was. "Must have been a village at some point. This country has a lot of those." "Oh, cool. Was that a smithy? I'm going to check it out." Without waiting, he broke into a stride across the street toward a wooden building with a rusted anvil and some tools sitting in front. Even from here, Isabella could see the wooden beams that stood slanted diagonally across the shop. "Be careful," she shouted after him. "You're one to talk. You always put yourself in all sorts of danger." Jaden spun to face her and backpedaled. "I know how to take care of myself, Jay." "And I don't?" He spread his arms. Just as he said that, his heel loudly caught on a jutting cobblestone, and he stumbled, careening forward with a clumsy half-spin. He just barely managed to stay on his feet. Isabella didn't say anything. She just sucked her lips into her mouth in a told-you-so manner. Jaden frowned and turned away from her. He walked normally for the rest of the way to the smithy. Isabella shook her head and continued sucking in the view. Even in its abandonment, the village was beautiful. The destruction from the elements and the moss and the vines only gave it another layer of beauty, like finely aged wine. Isabella took a few more photos and then recorded a short video of the surroundings. She was about to post it on Instagram, but then she noticed that she had no signal. Posting for her 14,000 followers would have to wait until she was back to civilization, even though the internet wasn't great at the hotel either. "Jaden, anything interesting in there?" She called out as she snapped another picture of the broken spire of the church. She wondered if going inside would be a possibility. Jaden would probably be against it, but there's no way Isabella would find a place like this only to peek from the outside. It would be like going to Starbucks just to smell the coffee. Isabella lowered her phone and craned her neck toward the house of the blacksmith. "Jaden!" she shouted. She should have heard something, either his boots crunching or some shuffling, or in the worst case scenario, him answering her call. It wasn't like he didn't hear her, especially with the lack of such noise. Isabella swallowed. For the first time that day, something unpleasant clambered from her gut to her chest. She didn't like it. She shoved the phone into her pocket and walked in the direction of the smithy. "Jaden!" she yelled once more, this time in an accusatory manner. She swore she was going to kick his ass as soon as she found him. It was okay if he ignored her in their apartment back home. The place was big after all, and 2 thick doors separated their offices, which effectively muffled much of the noise. But to ignore her here, it made her angry. "Jaden?" she said sternly as she stepped in front of the workshop for a clear view. But the figure belonging to her boyfriend that she expected to see prowling in the shadows, illuminating stuff here and there with his flashlight, wasn't there. Instead, what greeted her was a small, empty workspace. Scattered tools, broken and rotted workbenches, and a forge that could not be reached because of the collapsed roof. Isabella spun around. She didn't have enough time to scream when the thing jumped in front of her. Boo! Jaden raised his stiff palms in Isabella's face and then broke into a laughing fit. She didn't scream, but she did become startled. He saw it in the way her eyes and nostrils widened and the way her face and hands jerked as if electrocuted. Belatedly, she raised a hand to her chest as if to calm her beating heart. She looked up at the sky and then shot daggers at Jaden. He stopped laughing, but the smile refused to leave his face. Lecture incoming in 3, 2, 1. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Isabella raised a hand and brought it down on Jaden's shoulder. He defensively raised his hands against her blows, continuing to laugh at her reaction. Startling her was one of his favorite things to do, whether it was hiding in the closet or sneaking up on her when she was in the kitchen and pinching her ass, or bursting through the door like a cowboy. He knew she would get pissed at him for doing it in the middle of the woods, but he just couldn't resist. "Seriously, what the hell is your problem, man?" Isabella finally stopped hitting him and slapped her sides. "I'm sorry, but it was just way too funny." "No, it wasn't. Seriously, Jaden, don't ever do that again. Not while we're..." She gestured around her. "Here." The serious expression on her face and the timbre with which she conveyed that sentence told Jaden that he had gone too far. He sighed, his face going slack. "Okay, I'm sorry, alright? I won't do it again. Okay, Izzy?" She paused as if to consider that. Finally, she nodded, much to his relief. Disaster averted. "Where do you want to go next?" he asked. "There." She pointed to the church. "It's going to be old and unstable, and I know you're going to want to climb unsafe structures, and I don't want you doing that." He wanted to say, but chose not to say anything. Instead, he gave her a big nod. That seemed to remove the anger from her face. They strode down the street, glancing at the surrounding buildings. Jaden expected to see some forms of modern vandalism, graffiti, discarded beer bottles, and other trash littering the floor. But the town seemed untouched, which was amazing. How did something like this manage to go unseen when it was so conspicuously placed next to the trail? Then again, the trail was deep in the woods, a long way from the closest point of civilization. Whoever decided to trek it probably did for the same reason Jaden and Isabella did, to enjoy nature and not to go binge drinking all night long. The church was inaccessible, guarded by the bevy of bushes, trees, and other plant life that clung to it from every direction. A clear stairway led up to it, but Mother Nature had blocked the path. It wasn't simple vegetation that Jaden and Isabella could jostle through. No, they would need machetes to clear their way through the thick boughs in front of them. "Aw, too bad," Isabella said, her shoulders drooping in disappointment. "We'll come more prepared next time, babe." Jaden hung an arm around her shoulder. Secretly, he was glad that access to the church was blocked. Isabella squinted defiantly at the church, probably trying to think of a way to get through. Jaden got worried that an idea would pop into her head, but then she shrugged and said, "Yeah, you're right." Jaden flashed her a smile. "Let's see what's over there. I think I saw a path earlier." They continued until the houses stopped accompanying them, and the cobblestone path merged into a beaten path. "I wonder what this place was like back when people still lived in it." Jaden, making a clicking noise with his tongue. "This one street was probably the entire village. That meant everybody knew everybody. And if the neighbors back then in Eastern Europe were the way they are now, then you can bet they knew everything about your private lives." Isabella furrowed her nose at that. Not long after they started down the new trail, the ground on their left side descended to a small valley. Jaden stopped in his tracks. "What's up?" Isabella asked. "Look." Jaden pointed down the valley. Nestled between the trees was a clearing, and in the middle of the clearing, a wooden hut. "What the heck?" Isabella approached to take a closer look. "Look how intact it is. You think someone lives there?" "I don't know." "I want to check it out." She took a step toward the slope when Jaden grabbed her by the wrist. She whipped around to face him, her hand squeezed into a fist. "No, too dangerous." "Come on, it's not so bad. I'll be careful on my way down." She turned to leave, but Jaden's hand still clamped around her wrist. Noticing this, she looked at her wrist and then at him, silently demanding that he let go. He did, and then he said, "I'll go first, okay?" He knew he wouldn't be able to convince her not to go, so he at least wanted to be able to secure the route for her. "Okay," she said, her hand relaxing. Noticing that she wouldn't scurry off as soon as her arm was free, Jaden let her go. He clenched the straps of his backpack and approached the start of the slope. Isabella was right. It didn't look too dangerous. The hills were interspersed with trees and vegetation, but nothing like back in the village, big enough to swallow an entire adult. Prudently, Jaden took the first step on the soft, grassy ground, and then another, sliding while keeping his center of balance backward to avoid tumbling. He wouldn't have noticed that the ground had grown steeper had his foot not skidded slightly. "Shit," he murmured, a hand instinctively grabbing hold of the hill behind him for support. "Are you okay?" Isabella shouted. Jaden looked back up. She was 30 feet above him, standing dangerously close to the edge. Climbing back up was going to be a bitch. Damn Issy and her crazy ideas. "Yeah, hold on a little longer." He looked back down. He could see the slope abruptly ending a few dozen feet below him, but the bottom of the valley was still not there. He got on his rear and slid down the wet grass, using the heels of his boots as brakes. He had good control, until he didn't. He got too cocky with the sliding speed until his heels no longer stopped his descent, instead helplessly sliding across the grass. Shit, shit. His heel caught on a jutting rock. For a split second, he thought, thank God, until he realized his entire balance had been thrown forward, and he was leaping across the abrupt ledge and toward the ground 20 feet below. Jaden's scream caused Isabella's breath to hitch in her throat. The loud thwack that came right after was sickening. The silence that ensued was unnerving. "Jay!" She screamed at the top of her lungs, her heart rate going faster than throughout the entire hike today. "Jaden!" "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. Jaden, answer me! Are you okay?" The silence of the woods was her only answer. And then a groan erupted from somewhere far below. Jaden. Isabella sucked in a breath and braced herself to go down the slope. "Izzy?" Jaden's meek voice bounced from the bottom of the ravine. Isabella stopped. "Jaden, thank God. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" No response again. Isabella was about to scream, but Jaden's voice interrupted her. "I broke my leg. I can't move." Fuck, fuckity fuck. "Jaden, I'm coming down," she screamed and took a step forward. "No." Jaden's voice pierced the air. "Don't come down. It's too dangerous." The words came out with a hiss. It was obvious that he was in a lot of pain. "I can't just leave you down there," she shouted. "You have to. Find help." "Are you crazy? It's miles away. I'm not leaving." She took a step forward. Her foot was on the slope, but her weight was on the foot higher on the ground. She stopped when Jaden called out again. "Izzy, please. You can't help me down here. Just go." He murmured something after telling her to go. It took Isabella a moment to decipher the words as, "Fuck, it hurts." Tears trickled down her face. How the hell was this happening? This was all her fault. Jaden kept warning her that exploring dangerous areas could end with her being hurt, but she didn't listen. And where did that get her? They were in the middle of a vast forest, far away from any humans, and Jaden's leg was broken. If she could just rewind the time to 1 minute earlier. Just 1 goddamn minute so she could stop Jaden's fall. Fuck. Hold on, maybe I can call someone, she shouted in a cracked voice. The frayed thread of hope that she held onto died when she whipped out her phone and noticed the little cross circle icon in the corner of her screen. Nevertheless, she went into the call option. It took her a few tries to dial the emergency services with her trembling fingers. The call failed to go through. Please, come on, Isabella cried as she took the phone in her hands and tried again. Nothing. Jaden, can you move? She called. She already knew the answer, but she hoped against hope that Jaden would give her a different answer this time. Maybe the pain wasn't so bad. Maybe after the initial shock, he was able to skip up the hill on 1 foot. It wouldn't be impossible, right? Jay? Isabella called again with no response from her boyfriend. I can't, he shouted. His voice was weaker. That wasn't good. Isabella knew that by standing in one spot, she was only wasting precious time. She had to find help before Jaden went into shock. Jaden! Wait right there. I'm gonna run back for help, okay? Jaden? Yeah, he shouted in a clipped tone. She spun on her heel and bolted down the trail. The pain enveloped Jaden's entire being until it was the only thing that existed. Upon falling, a buzzing filled his ears, along with the throbbing of his torso. That was good because it meant he was still alive. But then the pain in his torso receded, while the one in his leg remained a persistent squeeze. One look down, there was more than enough for the heat to drain from his face. The first thing he noticed was the red and white on his cargo pants. Those collars didn't belong there, and Jaden knew right away that seeing that could only be bad. After his brain finally decided to cooperate, the image before him cleared, and he recognized the white as his femur sticking out and the red as his blood. First came the shock, staring at the mangled mess of his extremity and refusing to believe that it was really there. And then, as if on cue, the sharp pang of pain shot through his leg, and the metallic smell of blood invaded his nostrils. It was unlike anything he had ever felt in his life. Jaden had broken both of his arms on separate occasions, but those weren't open fractures. What he was facing here, the sharp white stick that was supposed to be inside of him, jutting out of his broken skin at an impossible angle, enough even to tear through his cargo pants. Bile climbed up Jaden's throat. He turned his head to the side and let the vomit shoot out of his mouth. It fell down the side of his face and ear, the smell of copper mixing in with an acidic redolence from his undigested lunch. The pain was like knives traveling through the inside of his leg. He hissed and groaned, his limb on fire. The urge to grab it, move it, do anything with it was strong, but he couldn't, and that pained him even more. But then, Isabella's voice came from somewhere far in the distance. He couldn't tell what she was saying at first, but then her voice cleared up somewhat. The pain still clouded Jaden's ability to fully understand Isabella, but she was there, thank God. She was there, and she would help him. He looked up. Just above him stood a vertical, rocky cliff face. Vegetation guarded the ledge, making it impossible for him to see Isabella from where he was. This was such a big mistake. Even if his leg was okay, there would be no way back unless they went around to look for a path back up, which might end up with them getting lost. After a brief exchange, he told Isabella to look for help. Between the pain that dominated his every thought and the need to convince Isabella not to descend the slope, Jaden wanted to scream in frustration. Eventually, she listened to him because she said she would go look for help and that he should wait where he was. Not like I planned on running a lap around the woods anytime soon, he wanted to say, but he was too exhausted. His lips were dry, cold sweat washed over him, and a shiver was already setting in. The patter of receding footsteps somewhere above indicated that Isabella was on her way to get help, which left Jaden in complete and utter silence. He hadn't known he would feel so alone after her departure. A part of him wanted to shout after her to come back, to not leave him down there, but he knew that the only rational solution was for her to come back with someone. What a pain in the ass, he thought as he looked at his leg once more. and allowed his head to slump backward to the uncomfortable rock. This was going to be such a hassle. Isabella would need to look for the authorities, and they would need to put together a rescue team for him to get back to town and give him medical treatment. Two things comforted him about the whole thing though. The first one was the fact that he knew the authorities would waste no resources saving one of their own citizens. The second one was the fact that he took out medical insurance, which was not at all high in Europe. That almost made a smile creep up on his face. Jaden stared at the tall canopies of the trees blocking the sky. It was much darker in this part of the woods. Then it hit him. It wasn't just the woods. Daylight was burning fast. It wouldn't be long until nightfall took over. Would the rescue services even look for him at night, or would it be deemed too dangerous? Would he even survive until morning? What if there were dangerous animals nearby? What if the smell of his blood attracted predators? Jaden dismissed those thoughts because they made him panic, and because he couldn't think from all of the pain. Fuck, he was so thirsty. His bottle of water was in his backpack, but he was lying on it, and there was no way he'd be able to get into a sitting position without arousing more pain in his leg. He would ignore the thirst for now. When it got really bad, he would bite the bullet and fetch food and water from his backpack. What about taking a leak? Well, I hope you brought an extra pair of diapers, he mocked himself. Time slipped away. It could have been hours or minutes. It was impossible to say. The only thing that Jaden was sure of was the constant pain. The throbbing and the burning never abated, but extra pangs of pain crashed over his leg in waves, strong enough to force him to clench his jaw and moan. He wished that he had brought some painkillers with him. He was prepared for all sorts of situations that he could encounter on a hike, but he hadn't thought about the most basic thing: first aid. Isabella. This was her fucking fault. If only she had listened to him for once and agreed not to go exploring a dangerous looking place, none of this would have happened. Then again, it was inevitable. Isabella was the kind of person who didn't learn until she got burned. Jaden was glad that it was him who got hurt and not Isabella. He would never let her live it down. He would make sure to remind her of it every time they got into an argument. Oh, you're angry because I left the toilet seat up? Well, remember that time we went hiking in the woods and you wanted to go down a hill and I ended up breaking my leg and needing surgery? She would learn her lesson after all this was done. After all the panic was over and Jaden woke up with the cast on his leg, he would crack a joke about the broken femur, and they would both laugh in relief, and she would promise never to go exploring abandoned places again. Shame that it took a broken leg in the middle of the woods for her to see the dangers, but it was what it was. Something rustled nearby. Not something light that scuttled through the leaves before burrowing into its den. No, something heavy that caused the ground to crunch. Jaden's head instinctively went up as he scanned the area. Was it Isabella with the rescue team? No, it couldn't be. She only left a short while ago. No way would she be able to return so fast. Unless she ran into someone along the way? Maybe a forest ranger or something like that. Hello? Jaden called out with a hoarse voice. Then again, louder. Hello? More rustling, but no response. If this was a person, surely they would have said something. A twig snapped somewhere. In the absence of all other noise, it was too loud. Then it hit Jaden. It was quiet, deafeningly so. No chirping of the birds or buzzing of the insects. Nothing. That could only mean one thing. A predator was nearby. Jaden propped himself up on his elbows. Even just that action sent another twinge through his already painful leg. He reached a hand towards one of the side pockets and unzipped it, giving a silent thanks that the object he was looking for rested against his healthy leg. He fished out the bear mace and fumbled with it in his hands until it pointed away from him, his forefinger ready to squeeze the top of the can and spray the substance on the approaching animal. He held out the mace in front of him, his head darting in various directions, trying to pinpoint where the rustling was coming from. "Hey, whoever you are, stay away!" he shouted, mostly because he knew that shouting was one way to warn the bear that he was not alone in the area, and therefore stopping him from coming closer. The rustling grew closer. Moreover, it quickened. Mixed in with the sound of foliage breaking under something's weight plodding through it came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, and they were growing faster. What started as shy, probing steps turned into a full-on dashing through the forest. Jaden's head and hand holding the mace whipped around in a futile attempt to locate whoever was in the area. He realized too late that the footsteps were, in fact, coming from behind him. Something crashed into his back, sending him toppling onto his stomach, the bear mace knocked out of his hand. His leg exploded with new, unimaginable pain. Jaden barely had time to recover when something sharp stung his neck. He tried to scream, but he couldn't. Warm liquid trickled down his neck, and he knew that it was blood. His blood. As if that wasn't enough, something brushed through his hair and grabbed a firm grip on his scalp. It pulled his head back until it was raised enough for him to see the bear mace resting in the grass, mere feet away from him. This time, Jaden screamed. It was interrupted when his head violently snapped to the side with a loud pop that reverberated in his skull. His head slumped uselessly to the ground, his temple hitting the dirt. Any resistance that Jaden wanted to continue exhibiting was gone because he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. All he could do was stare at the grass and the trees as shuffling ensued around him. When the sharpness in his neck burrowed deeper, he prayed for it to be over fast. Isabella ran until she couldn't run anymore, until her legs and lungs burned, and until the tears dried from her eyes. She then resumed walking until she was able to run again. She had made it back to the village and then looked to the left and right, her panicked mind trying to remember where they had come from. Everything looked the same over here. She recognized the house that she and Jaden had seen first on the way down, and she knew the trail would be right up there. She plodded through the deep grass, stumbling along the way until she reached the elevation. From there, she climbed the hill using all fours, but it was too high for her to reach some of the rocky ledges. She had to go around and find a better foothold, and it only made her hyperventilate more because she was losing precious time. Jaden was down in the valley, his leg broken, and night would fall soon. In her frenzied mind, Isabella tried to calculate how long it would take her to reach help. They had left a few hours ago. Hours. It would be hours until she was able to reach the town for help and come back with the rescue. When Isabella finally climbed to the top of the ravine, her head whipped around. There was no trail. Why was there no trail? She was sure it was supposed to be. There it was, just 30 feet away from her. She pushed through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that abraded her exposed arms. Once her feet were on the beaten path, she broke into a steady dash. She wanted to cry some more, but she couldn't let herself do it. Jaden needed her help. The tinge of orange that poked between the foliage told her that she and Jaden had overstayed in the woods, and that daylight was burning way too fast. She didn't let that discourage her. She ran past the familiar curves of the trail, painfully reminded of how far she still had to go. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, until her legs shook like pudding and her lungs couldn't heave in more than a whiff of air, until night fell. But she didn't stop. Her torch illuminating the path in front of her, Isabella continued with a steady gait, sobbing during those times, breaking into occasional jogs. Surely she was close now, right? Something rustled off the trail. Isabella froze in her tracks and swept the beam of the torch across the trees where the sound had come from. She couldn't see anything. "Is someone there?" she called out, hopefulness clamoring from the deepest recesses again. "Please, we need help. My boyfriend is hurt. Please." Her voice cracked when she said that, new tears sliding down her cheeks, shuddering. But then a sound made her go stock still. A low groan erupted from the trees, deep, guttural, raspy. One that could by no means belong to a human being. More rustling, approaching Isabella. She didn't wait to see what it was. She spun on the balls of her shoes and dashed down the trail, her body filled with newfound strength. On cue, the thing in the trees broke out of the undergrowth, its footsteps stampeding after Isabella. She suppressed the urge to scream as she ran, her mind racing with only one goal: get to safety. That thought was short-lived when her foot got yanked backward and she fell headlong onto the hard ground. Isabella's flashlight dropped out of her hand just as she whacked her face on the dirt. A shockwave sent through her nose, mouth, and gums. She had dislodged and chipped some teeth, that was for sure. She planted her palms on the ground to push herself up, but before she could do that, she helplessly slid backward, away from the flashlight, deeper into the darkness. Isabella's screams were not heard by anyone that night. Sometime later, the door of the hut opened, and the two hikers were dragged inside.
This is a damn good book. It Lives in the Woods by Boris Bacic. You can check out the links to his Amazon and YouTube channels in the description. Also in the description is going to be a link to a free book of his. Do not want to miss out on that opportunity. So a bit of an info dump here. Life has taken some turns. That being said, I'm not certain what my upload schedule is going to be on this channel. However, if you still want to hang out with me, I'm going to be working on my gaming channel, Yaltsin Prime Gaming. It's going to be the same on Twitch. I'd love to have you guys drop in. Wanted to take another moment to say thank you for all of the support you guys have shown me and this channel. It's been amazing. You guys are fucking awesome. But until next time, remember, just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.